The views and opinions expressed on the show are those of the guests or hosts, and not necessarily those of the advertisers, networks, platforms, or stations. Warning that the content of the show may not be suitable for all audiences, and that viewer discretion is advised. The show does not intend to provide medical, legal, or financial advice, and viewers or listeners should consult with a professional before making any decision.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Jack Carey, your host on Paranormal Intelligence Agency Radio, and we are the show that investigates all kinds of paranormal phenomenon, conspiracy theories, and just strange things that take place around the world. As always, it's been a bit of a busy week. The rate of political news coming out has been crazy. One of the more interesting things I came across was Chuck Schumer continuing his request of Donald Trump to put out an executive order on UFOs. I'm sure that given the relationship between the president and Elon Musk, there must be some sort of discussion that has or will take place on the subject matter and on UAP disclosure at large. It's interesting to me because Elon Musk has been quoted in the past as saying that he didn't believe that there was anything to the UFO phenomenon. I think this is one of the things he's completely wrong about. So going forward, we're going to have some very interesting times ahead with UFO disclosure. On sort of the back end of disclosure with social media taking place. There are continuing claims going on from Dr. Greer's camp and from the To the Stars Academy even, and various entities that are sort of, they're sort of putting it out there that there's big news a-coming. That there are, in fact, as yet unknown whistleblowers with some really damning evidence that are about to make the scene. I think that's interesting because it does coordinate with the Webbot predictions of late, and those predictions really lately are beginning to shock even Cliff High because they're insinuating that there's going to be some seriously shocking stuff come out, like, worldwide kind of news, but seriously shocking. So shocking. I found this very interesting. So shocking that the so-called woo guys that are out there, for those of you who are familiar with that term, these are all of the sort of new agey guys that are out there talking about galactic federations of light and all that kind of stuff that pretty much exist in the woo world of paranormal. The Webbot is given indications that really all of their followers, and some of these guys are just huge with hundreds of thousands of followers, but it's predicting that their followers just sort of drop them cold because of the sheer amount of real crazy alien and paranormal stuff that they're being bombarded with from mainstream sources. In other words, it looks like they don't have to go the back route anymore of trying to obtain this information. Like, it's just going to come out, and it's going to come out so strongly and in such a fashion that, it looks like the government almost has to beat people over the head to get them to accept it. So you're talking about some serious change coming. I talked last week about the Webbot prediction that pretty soon here, as we go into the spring and spring You hit June, the end of June, there's a 78-day period that the WebBot is identifying where there's going to be some seriously crazy news come out around the world about aliens living in the world's oceans. It predicts that really the entirety of the world's populations all turn their attention to the world's oceans, and that this sort of leads to people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and people, these billionaire class that have the resources begin to monitor the oceans. And when they do, they discover apparently something absolutely enormous moving around the world's oceans that we were never, ever aware of before, or if we were, it was highly classified military type stuff. But that it says it's, the object is, whatever it is big enough that it's like the size of Mount Rainier. So you can just imagine, what that must be. Is it an underwater alien city? Who knows? But that's really interesting. So I bring that up because tonight's main subject that we're going to get into is the research done by a man named Ivan T. Sanderson, who is legendary in the world of cryptozoology, but was also an intelligence agent and investigator into UFOs. And
since we're going to be talking
investigator into UFOs, and he wrote a fascinating book called Invisible Residents. So look that up. And if you've not read Ivan T. Sanderson's work before, it's well worth reading and absorbing his knowledge. He was a genius of an individual, and it's fascinating because we're going to be talking about how this book discusses the possibility of aliens in the oceans. And you have to realize that Ivan T. Sanderson was in his prime back in like the 60s and 70s. So this is a guy that was way ahead of his time. And not only does he discuss in Invisible Residents the aliens in the oceans, but he also discusses a very interesting theory that he came up with that he called the vile vortices, and he identified 12 of them around the world. The vile vortices are what today in the paranormal world we call devil's triangles. Basically, the Bermuda Triangle being the most famous of all of them. Not all of them fall in the ocean. Some of them occur on land, and one of those is the Alaskan Triangle, and that's an area where at least 16,000 people have vanished into thin air in the last 30-year period. They're averaging 500 complete vanishings a year in the Alaskan Triangle, where there's no trace of the individual left. And he noticed that in each one of these vile vortices areas, there was an inordinate number of missing people, but also missing craft, airplanes and boats, things like that. And it's fascinating because he came across some research done by some Russian scientist who wrote a paper that was titled, "Is the Earth a Giant Crystal?" And in this paper, and this was written back when it was the Soviet Union, it wasn't Russia. These were Soviet scientists who wrote this, and it was a classified paper that only came out after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And in it, they provided really fascinating evidence to suggest that the Earth is actually a giant quartz crystal at its center. And that the crystal actually formed first before, and as it spun around in space, it slowly rounded itself off. But as it was rounding itself off, it left natural ridges here and there. Those ridge areas are kind of like, you can think of it like protrusions through the Earth's crust of quartz crystal. And it's in this quartz crystal and the crystalline structure of the Earth that they believed was causing all of this anomalous activity to occur in these 12 different areas. And that will be the topic of tonight's main discussion. I did want to touch on a few other things that are probably going to pop up on the radar screen. Everybody out there that listens to the show knows that I'm big on cyber prophecy. And so cyber prophecy can, it's paranormal because it's being derived from what we would consider paranormal sources. It's being derived from remote viewers, and it's being derived from data trend language analysis at the WebBot. And where those two things cross is usually a point of high importance. And those two things are crossing in a way that is undeniable, all pointing to an economic, the only thing we can describe it as is a complete economic upheaval occurring within the United States. Apparently, the first sort of salvo of this occurring is going to take place on or around the 26th of February. So you're talking about just a few days away. And they say that because the WebBot is showing that the day after February 26th, there's a lot of so-called emotional release language that appears in media outlets all around the world. That's usually right after a major event takes place. And in this particular case, all the indications are that it is a negative economic occurrence of some kind. That seems to check out when you look at all of the other strange things that are happening around the world. There are governments that are hoarding gold, and you can see them scrambling behind the scenes in our own government, well, not even behind the scenes, in front of the scenes these days, trying to find any money at all, because 36 trillion in debt and $1 trillion to service the loan. And then on top of that, it looks like there's a bunch of countries that are about to stop buying U.S. debt. And if you can't raise any more money, you are toast. So that's kind of where we're at. And the WebBot predicted years ago that there would be an occurrence like this that would sort of put an end to fiat currencies. That's interesting to me because the guys over at Future Forecasting Group, which is a renowned remote viewing group of really what most people consider to be the best remote viewers on the planet, are all saying that there is indeed an economic catastrophe that's looming, and that according to their targeting, it looks like that at some point during this, the U.S. currency, the U.S. dollar, actually gets tied to a basket of cryptocurrencies. So it won't be like any single cryptocurrency. It's going to be like tied to a basket of like 100 different cryptocurrencies, to the entire cryptocurrency market, if you will. So that's fascinating. You do have the whole war in Russia and Ukraine taking place, and that showed up in the WebBot and in the remote viewers. Is actually find it fascinating that there might be negotiating a peace, because the WebBot and the remote viewers see something opposite of that. They see the war actually escalating over time. So that's interesting. But as always, we do have some paranormal in the news, and looks like California, they like to be cutting edge, if you can call it that. But there's a California lawmaker who just introduced a bill to make Bigfoot the official state cryptid. So that's interesting. I wonder what all the other cryptids are thinking. They're getting finally, Bigfoot's getting his due, I guess. So that's interesting, and that's actually been on a lot of outlets. There are statutes in the Pacific Northwest and different areas where I think in Washington State it's illegal to shoot a Bigfoot, which is interesting because they've never even acknowledged that the creature exists, of course. So the UAP news is pretty scant this week. Physics.org is running an article that is typical of our scientific community. It's headlined, "What would actual scientific study of UAPs look like?" Well, there is some actual scientific study going on out there. They just don't like to admit it. There is a new task force that's been formed to expose federal secrets, specifically on the JFK assassination, the Epstein list, and UFOs. And this federal secrets task force was reported on Fox News, and there's 7 House Republicans that have been named to it. And they're dedicated, it says, to weighing the declassification of some of the U.S.'s most infamous so-called secrets. And heading that up is the Florida Congresswoman, Representative Anna Paulina Luna, who will lead the explosive panel, formerly known as the Task Force on the Declassification of Federal Secrets. It will operate under the House Oversight Committee and its chairman, Representative James Comer from Kentucky. So for those of you who have been following the UFO disclosure movement taking place, you'll know that Representative Paulina Luna is front and center when it comes to the congressional committees on UFO disclosure. And I might remind everybody out there that at the last one, she's the one that asked, David Grush, about bodies being recovered. She's stated many times that she is aware of aliens in the oceans. She has really publicly stated a number of shocking things that most people are completely unaware of, and she's done so on camera during these committees. And so if she's leading the panel to reveal secrets about the JFK assassination, which many of us have seen evidence to suggest that he was killed because of the UFO cover-up, I think a lot of sparks are about to fly. James Comer is the same way. So you've got a really interesting scenario building up where you can see the mechanics behind the scenes about to go into motion that are going to fulfill what the WebBot has predicted would take place. That's what I'm showing you. What the WebBot predicted a long time ago, bam, here's the task force that's about to do it. So that's paranormal in the news. And it's interesting because, I'm a big believer in OSINT, which the CIA is too. And OSINT works on the principle of open source intelligence gathering. And if you actually are a kind of a nerdy freak like me and you watch OSINT YouTube videos on OSINT techniques, and how to gather intelligence from open source materials all around the world, then you'll know that really there are some guarded secrets out there, of course, under lock and key. But anything that you suspect, generally, if you read enough information on the subject, you can determine the truth of what your question is about it. In other words, there's enough information published about any given subject that almost nothing can be kept truly secret anymore. And you're beginning to see the mechanics of how UFO disclosure is truly going to take place, because you have to remember, if you've listened to my show in the past, that it was predicted that all of the money just dries up. And this was this was many, many months ago. I talked about how the WebBot was saying the money is going to dry up in the UFO programs. And when it does, when that money goes away, so do all of the impetus to keep it a secret from the public goes away with it. These scientists that are involved with those programs have been dying to let the public know what they've been working on all this time. And nothing's going to keep them from it. The money was keeping them from it before, and the propensity of getting more and more money for more and more research would keep them there and on the job. That's all going bye-bye. And the WebBot's predicting that by June, Doge and Elon Musk have actually reached into the Department of Defense, where they can see the money going down the drain to these black hole projects, and they just start turning off the spigots. And that's when really the you-know-what begins to hit the fan for the deep state. So it does predict, however, that the deep state, they kind of muster one last stand. They try to pull off something, but it ends up not working. And really, this isn't just a movement. It's like a wave coming from the cosmic center of our galaxy that is washing over our planet, that is about to just wipe the old dark cabal that has run the world completely away. And that's really a cosmic mechanism that's taking place. It's kind of beyond anybody's power to do anything about it, including them. They are simply cosmically toast, coming up very soon. And I've mentioned in the past that many researchers now refer to these cabal, this group of people that have held power for 6,000 years, as the Khazarian Mafia. And that's a term that the WebBot predicts will be used in the future to describe these people. So, but as I was stating earlier, our main discussion tonight, we are going to talk about aliens in the ocean, and specifically about missing people in the various vile vortices areas around the world. We want to touch on the hitchhiker effect, and we want to discuss, is there an actual scientific mechanism by which these people simply vanish into thin air. It's something that I have theorized about for a very long time, and something I wrote extensively about in my book, Paranormal Planet. And we'll get back to discussing the actual science behind what might be occurring in these vile vortices areas with all this quartz crystal right after our break.
Not on my watch, our military service members say, as they volunteer to serve. Not on my watch, they say, as they leave their families behind to keep the rest of ours safe. As they move out, stand firm, and take fire. So not on our watch, we say, to the severely ill or injured veterans who can't get the care they deserve, the therapists they need to walk again, the treatment they need to talk again, the lifetime of day-to-day help they need to live full and independent lives. When there's no more government funding, or a nursing home seems like the only option, or everyone says there's no hope for recovery, we won't leave one warrior behind. Not on our watch. Find out how you can do your part at findwwp.org.
In deep dark wood where shadows lie, Bigfoot sneaks with piercing eyes, footprints large in the silent night, a beast untamed, it's out of sight. Dogman howls at the creeping moon, sharp teeth flashing come too soon, through the fog in a misty blur, a chilling ground your blood does stir. Strange creatures on a restless night, disappear with the fading light. Time slips, takes out of time, mysteries in the forest ride. Wonder where the pines grow tall, echoes from another age call. Time bends, twisting the whispering leaves. Who knows what lurks, what deceives? Lost in thought, we drift away. Different world in the light of day. Past and present blend as one. In the forest where there's no sun. Ghostly visions, they come and go. Secrets hidden we may not know. Dormant flowers speak for roads. In these woods they make their homes. Strange creatures on a restless night, disappear with the fading light. Time slips, take us out of time. Mysteries in the forest ride. Rise, wonder where the pines grow tall, echoes from another age call. Time bends, twisting the whispering leaves. Who knows what the forest ride? Mysteries in the forest ride. Wonder where the pines grow tall, echoes from another age call. Time bends, twisting the whispering leaves. Who knows what lurks, what deceives? Lost in thought, we drift away. Different world in the light of day. Past and present blend as one. In the forest where there's no sun. Ghostly visions, they come and go. Secrets hidden we may not know. Dogman prowls, Bigfoot roam.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm Jack Carey, your host here on PIA Radio. And we have been talking about, some paranormal taking place in the news, this new task force that's going to pretty much hit us up with all the JFK assassination secrets, and how I think they'll also include, and it will have to include, how that was a byproduct of him about to cough up all of our UFO secrets to the Soviets in an attempt to make peace with them. So that's really interesting stuff. And if you look up that information out there, it's out there online to be had, to be pieced together. You can go to my YouTube channel. It's just Jack Carey on YouTube. And I do have a video detailing the connections between the UFO phenomenon and the JFK assassination. And, maybe even identified, or I show where people think they have identified, what may have been one of the shooters that was never nabbed. Obviously, he's a man with a black umbrella in the crowd, so check that out. You'll be fascinated by it. It's a case that's fascinated me for a long time. And maybe in some of those secrets, they'll get to all of the many missing people that are happening all around the world and have been for quite a while now, for decades at least. There have been far, far too many humans go missing around the planet, and many of them go missing in areas that were identified by the famous Ivan T. Sanderson as being vile vortices areas, and that this might in fact be tied to some research conducted by some Soviet scientists who said that the Earth was probably a large quartz crystal. It spun around in space to the point where it rounded itself off, eventually becoming the Earth we know. But it wasn't a perfectly round sphere. There are edges on the quartz crystal, and there are places where the crystal protrudes basically through the crust of the Earth. And it's in these areas where we experience a high number of very strange activity taking place. And most alarming among those different activities is missing people. For a long time, I conducted research, paranormal field research in the San Luis Valley of South Central Colorado, a place that has been identified over time by various researchers as being a Disneyland of the paranormal. I can say I spent approximately 20 years targeting that area. It is the world's longest and widest alpine valley. It is some 70 miles long and 50 miles wide, and it is ringed by 14,000-foot mountain peaks in the heart of South Central Colorado. It is a magical place. It's a place where the indigenous tribes from the Four Corners area believe it is the basically their Garden of Eden. Their holiest mountain is there, which is a place called Mount Blanca, where I believe some quartz crystal skulls are still buried. But that'll be the subject of another show. And it's in this area where you have a lot of missing people, and you have a lot of UFO activity, and you have a lot of cryptid activity, and you have a lot of ghost activity. And really, it became a shocking thing that all of this paranormal activity was all occurring within a relatively small geographic area. Yeah, it's the largest alpine valley in the world, but why does it all occur in this one valley? and why with such frequency. And that led one thing to another to basically studying the topography of not only the San Luis Valley, but other areas like Sedona, Arizona, which is another one of these vile vortices areas where a high amount of really strange things take place all the time, including nonstop UFO/ET activity. And what we sort of discovered over time was that in each one of these areas in the United States, and then really around the world, where you have these so-called, and we refer to them as vortex areas, where you have these so-called vortex areas, you have vast deposits of quartz crystal. Vast deposits of quartz crystal. And quartz crystal has the ability to emit very, very strong electromagnetic fields. For instance, if you look up aeromagnetic maps of Sedona, you'll see that the mountains of Sedona, which is where all the quartz crystal is located, actually have electromagnetic fields that are 500 times more powerful than the surrounding countryside. That's really, really strong. And during this course of research, I came across the work of a scientist who had built something called a Mach effect thruster. And that's something that today they probably, when you have back engineered ET technology, this poor scientist with the Mach effect thruster, who believed it to be like this would be the future propulsion system of our spacecraft, probably has a big shock on his hands coming. But the point being is that the Mach effect thruster was really a 0-point energy device. When matter travels through space, there are minute fluctuations in that matter. Those minute fluctuations, through the use of this device, and the matter would be the spacecraft itself, can actually be harnessed and reused as more energy. That's making a very long, complicated scientific story short, but it's also known as the Woodward effect, and both of those things can be looked up readily online. What caught my attention about it was the fluctuations in matter traveling through space, because I knew that quartz crystal, when you compress it, actually ionizes, and when it ionizes, that's when it releases electromagnetic fields. So what appeared to be happening in my mind during the research of when I wrote Paranormal Planet was that the Earth, being a body of mass, was traveling through space with this quartz crystalline structure at its center, these protrusions that come up through the crust in various areas where missing people occur. And as the Earth is traveling through space, these minute fluctuations in the matter of our planet cause the quartz crystal to compress. And when it compresses, it releases these electromagnetic fields. And these fields are strong enough, and this is where it gets interesting. They're strong enough to tear a hole in the electromagnetic membrane that separates our dimension from other dimensions. And that's exactly what our physicists believe separates our dimension from other dimensions and from other beings in those dimensions. You're talking about fields that from time to time, as these fluctuations occur, literally rip a hole in that membrane between dimensions, or, if you like, create a doorway. And sometimes people just walk into another dimension and they just get swallowed up. They vanish into thin air. Sometimes they vanish into what might be occurring as a time slip. There have been many people throughout history who claim to have had these little jaunts back in time or into the future and then back again, where they describe really the best term I've heard for it is a sudden perturbation. It's a great word. There's a sudden perturbation, a subtle perturbation in the atmosphere around you, and all of a sudden things change and the scenery changes and you find yourself in a completely different place in a completely different time. That's the kind of mechanism that we're discussing. And it's interesting because over the years, I came across the missing 411 research, of course, put out by the now famous David Paulides, who went to great lengths to document the many thousands of people who have vanished into thin air in the United States National Park system. And they have compiled heat maps, if you will, cluster maps of where all of these missing cases occurred. And there are cluster areas where this happens, which is fascinating. Now, in the research with the PIA and our cryptid research, I discovered that you can take one of those cluster maps and lay it down, take a map of all of the known cave systems and lay it over the cluster map, and they're a spot-on match. You can then overlay that with a map of all 10,000 known credible Bigfoot sightings in North America, and they're a spot-on match. And I had to ask the question, and I still do, is that a coincidence, or is there something more to it? Or is Bigfoot responsible for all of these missing people? Or what we're looking at is something far stranger in nature, which would be the idea of doorways opening up spontaneously on our planet in various areas where you just happen to walk through and you're gone. It's interesting because in the missing 411 cases, one of the major findings is that the victim, the person who goes missing, doesn't leave a scent behind. No, the scent dogs can't pick up any scent at all. It's almost like they just stepped off a cliff. And in one of the cases, which is known as the berry picker cluster of cases, because an inordinate number of people have gone missing while picking wild berries in mountainous areas. But in one of those cases, which I talk about frequently, the one clue was left that wasn't left in any of the other cases, any of the thousands of missing people cases. And that clue was the half scream of the son of the couple who lost their son. He was just on the other copes of trees from them, picking wild berries. They heard a half scream that got muzzled, and he was gone. And I've often argued the case that only two things are capable of doing that, and either a hand went over his mouth and he was picked up and carried off at incredible speed because they were right around those trees in a heartbeat and he was gone, or he simply stepped off into another dimension and all they heard was his scream as the door slammed behind him. We don't really know. But there is a lot of sort of peripheral ancillary evidence out there that has a body of witnesses where, as I was discussing earlier, there were time slips that seemingly took place. One of those was a pilot who was flying through the Bermuda Triangle on his way to Miami. And this gentleman's still alive today. Thank God for him. But during his route, he describes how a very strange cloud formed in front of his airplane. It sort of boxed him in, then it formed a tunnel, and he could see electricity going around the tunnel, and it started to close in all around him, and all he could do was keep going through this tunnel. And when he came out the other end, he was basically at Miami. Inexplicably, an hour earlier than he should have been. It was like he went through a small time warp as he traveled through the Bermuda Triangle. And could it be that this gentleman is one of the, or if not the only, surviving witness to actually see this mechanism taking place right in front of his own eyes? I find it fascinating because some of the people that went missing in the missing 411 cases also happened to disappear on days when ships or aircraft went missing in the Bermuda Triangle. And obviously you have to ask the question, is that because what we were seeing was one of these planetary minute fluctuations taking place that compressed the crystal in various areas and people went missing in those areas simultaneously? Is that a possibility? We don't know. But when it comes to the missing 411 cases, one of the things that I've always caught me off guard initially, and now I go back to it because I don't think the numbers can be disputed at all, is the fact that in 99% of all of the cases examined, when the cases were compared to phases of the moon, they determined that all of them occurred when the moon was either at its brightest point or its darkest point. That wouldn't be that significant, except for there's a wide body of biological papers out there I discovered in my research that link predatory behavior to those 2 points in the lunar cycle. So could it be, as Michio Kaku, the famous physicist who's on all the documentaries these days, once said that if other dimensions exist, and they almost certainly do, it is wise to consider the idea that there are probably beings living on those entities. And if that's the case, then some of those beings are probably intelligent enough to have figured out a way into this dimension. And when you put those two things together, what you come up with is the possibility of an interdimensional predator of some kind, actually taking people in these different areas. And could it be that the vile vortices areas, some of which take place in the world's oceans, are areas where, who knows, maybe a paranormal cryptid of some kind can make its way into our world and nab people and vanish without a trace. Maybe it's the UFO phenomenon itself, and maybe it has something to do with the overall hitchhiker effect of the UFO phenomenon. These are all cutting edge, paranormal, theoretical possibilities, all based on the latest findings really in physics and from paranormal investigators. And where it's leading us is into areas that are really uncomfortable for a lot of investigators that are out there, and that's a good place to be. Usually the truth, when you come across it, is a pretty uncomfortable thing. And we have to remember, I like to remind people, well, my favorite quote was written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle for his character Sherlock Holmes, in which he says, when you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, has to be the truth. And I think that really the future of where paranormal research is right now, considering the vast number of missing people, is we're becoming better and better at identifying what's impossible, and at the same time attempting to identify things that could be true even though they are highly improbable. Because really that's where the paranormal world lies. For us right now, we consider these things to be highly improbable, but not impossible. And the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. That is a grave mistake to make. So in the paranormal world, we're sort of left with some interesting insights that we're gleaming from the scientists that have been at Stanford Research Institute, from Dr. Gary Nolan and from Dr. Colm Kelleher, among others that have been to Skinwalker Ranch, who have firsthand eyewitnessed the hitchhiker effect caused by the UFO phenomenon while they were doing their investigation work for the Pentagon and at the Pentagon, including and up to a profound cryptid encounter with a dogman. Now, how do you begin to explain that? That's what I'm talking about. How interdimensional is all of this activity? And are we beginning to see and suspect that interdimensional nature and origin of some of this activity, including the ET presence? I do have a FOIA requested memo that came from the FBI that was written in 1947, the year of Roswell, in which it states that they believed that the visitors, as they put it, actually came from an ethereal planet that existed on another plane, that this planet was somehow mirrored by the Earth, and that when you detonate a nuclear weapon on this planet, it somehow damages their planet on their plane of existence. And that they had found a way into our dimension and were actively trying to design DNA that would allow them to inhabit this dimension. Perhaps that's the answer to the alien abduction phenomenon. But next week, we will be exploring another crazy paranormal rabbit hole. Like I say, the news, the paranormal sort of research news that's out there to be snatched out of thin air off the internet and various sources is really sort of cascading into a major snowball. And I think as we go forward, we're going to have some really interesting stories to discuss. And with that, I will see you guys next week. Join me again for Paranormal Intelligence Agency Radio.